The Curtiss P-40 was an American single-engine, single-seat fighter and ground attack aircraft. The prototype was based on the P-36 Hawk and flew for the first time on the 14th of October 1938 in Buffalo, United States, where the Curtiss factory was located. Lack of engine performance delayed initial production, with Chief Engineer Don R. Berlin replacing the initial Pratt & Whitney engine for the Allison V1710-33 V12 that would figure on the first model. An initial order was placed to produce 524 P-40, worth almost $13 million, and the largest ever placed until then, for an American fighter. The French Air Force also ordered 140 models, but the country would capitulate before receiving them. These models were in turn delivered to the British Royal Air Force and were quickly put to good use. The P-40 started its operational life in early 1941 in the North African theater, integrating the Desert Air Force, where it faced German and Italian fighters with mixed results. The aircraft had several qualities, such as an enormous ability to resist enemy fire or its good performance at high speed. Some of its shortcomings were reflected in a poor climb rate or less than ideal maneuverability at low speed engagements. By 1942, the early variants of the P-40 were outclassed by German fighters and were switched to the role of escorting bombers or close air support. The P-40 suffered a major redesign with the D and E versions, incorporating the more powerful Allison V1710-39 engine and moving its armament to the wings. These versions started to see frontline action in early to mid-1942 and showed a better acceleration and dive speed, but still had a poor climb rate. The aircraft would be produced until late 1944, spanning almost the entire conflict and ending with a total production of 13,738 units in 13 different versions, making it the third most produced American fighter of the Second World War, surpassed only by the P-47 and P-51. The volume of units produced speaks for itself, and although the original design never realized the intended objective of replacing the British Spitfire or matching the German Messerschmitt, it had a unique characteristic that secured its place in history. It could withstand the toughest of conditions. From the scorched deserts in North Africa to the wet heat of the Pacific to the blistering cold of the Arctic and the Eastern Front, the P-40 endured all and was one of the fighters that saw action in a bigger variety of front lines. It was on the most unlikely theater, the Chinese front, that the P-40 did shine. A group of American volunteers commanded by Claire Lee Chennault formed the first American volunteer group, a squadron equipped with P-40Bs that was tasked with helping defend China from the Japanese invasion. The group arrived in China during April 1941, but several delays meant that it only saw action 12 days after the attacks on Pearl Harbor on the 20th of December 1941. These volunteers became known as the Flying Tigers, and success ramped until July 1942, when they were reabsorbed by the American Air Force, having shot down 286 Japanese aircraft. Still, it was on the front lines of continental Europe where the P-40 had the smallest impact, being relegated to a secondary role, initially by the British Hurricane and Spitfire, and later by the American P-47 and P-51 fighters, mainly due to its weak performance at higher altitudes. The P-40 was extremely rugged. Pilot T.R. Jacklin flew more than 300 kilometers after losing an aileron and 1/4 of the wing surface after a collision with another P-40. Some Warhawk pilots even used ramming attacks, relying entirely on its tough structure. Thanks to the sturdy nature, the P-40 was able to withstand high-G maneuvers with relative ease. It also featured an excellent dive speed, making it useful in a close air support role. When it was introduced, the P-40 had a very good range. This is partially the reason why it saw action in so many different war fronts. The single-speed supercharger of its Allison engine meant that the aircraft lacked high-altitude performance. This was also reflected in its poor climb rates. Although it was very good at turning at high speed, the P-40 lacked maneuverability at low airspeeds and was outturned by A6M0s and Ki-43 Oscars in the Pacific theater. Even when the P-40 initially reached the front lines, its speed was average at best, becoming quickly a slow airplane with further evolution of the war. The P-40 had 13 different versions spanning from the original P-40 to the P-40R. It was almost a completely different aircraft by 1944. We will look at some of the most produced versions, but there is clearly two different P-40s. The original version all the way to the C, called Tomahawk by the British, and the P-40D all the way to the N, called Kitty Hawk. P-40, the original version with the V1710-33 engine that could develop 1040 horsepower. It had two 50 cal nose-mounted machine guns and two wing-mounted 30 cal. P-40C, version with self-sealing fuel tanks and two additional 30 cal wing-mounted machine guns. It was the version most used by the British, called the Tomahawk Mark IIB. P-40D and E, versions with a major redesign to the nose to incorporate the new Ellison V1710-39 engine. The nose-mounted machine guns were removed and the four wing-mounted 30 cal were upgraded to 50 cal. The E version had a total of 6 wing-mounted 50 cal. P-40F to M, several versions with different engines and increasing power. P-40N, sometimes called the definitive version, it was by far the most produced of the variants. It reached the front lines in March 1944 and its production ended in September 1944 when the P-40 design had given everything it could. The British called it the Kitty Hawk Mark IV. The P-40 fought in every front line of the Second World War. For this comparison, we will consider the P-40E and we will put it head-to-head with two legendary aircraft, the Bf-109F4 and the A6M20. The P-40 had a sluggish 360 turn at low speed, but at higher speeds, the Warhawk had a very good maneuverability. American pilots were instructed not to try and out-turn a Japanese Zero in slow flight. Against the Bf-109, good P-40 pilots were able to out-turn it by using the Warhawk's strengths. Despite being possible to mitigate these issues, the P-40 was inferior in this department. The P-40 had a more powerful engine than the Zero, but it had also a much heavier weight. The Messerschmitt Friedrich version had the best engine of the three. The Warhawk was much slower than the Messerschmitt, but had a similar speed to the Zero. The P-40 had a very good combat range, almost double the Bf-109's. But the Japanese Zero had an exceptional range, almost unbeatable. One of the biggest shortcomings of the P-40 was its performance at high altitude, and that can be seen by the difference in ceiling. The 650 cals of the P-40E were adequate and could easily shoot down a Messerschmitt or Zero. The Warhawk was probably equivalent to its enemies in firepower. The possibility to carry 6 35-pound fragmentation bombs made it a good close air support aircraft, a role where it was better than the Bf-109 or the A6M. In the fighter role, both Bf-109F and the A6M2 were superior. Now that we've taken a look at the P-40's characteristics, let's rate the aircraft. August 1941. While returning to base over Egypt, Australian ace Clive Caldwell was attacked by two German Bf-109E, one of them piloted by the famous German ace Werner Schroer. Caldwell suffered 3 wounds from shrapnel and his P-40 Tomahawk was hit by more than 107.92 machine gun bullets and 5 20mm cannon shells. Despite the heavy damage suffered, Caldwell was able to shoot down Schroer's wingman and damage considerably the German ace's Messerschmitt, forcing him to disengage. Caldwell was able to return to base. 23rd to 25th of December 1941. The Flying Tigers volunteer unit, while defending the city of Rangoon, intercepted a total of 63 Japanese bombers escorted by 25 fighters. The Flying Tigers had 14 P-40s and were reinforced by 15 Buffaloes from the RAF. The two-day air battle saw a total of 35 Japanese bombers and fighters shot down while losing only 5 P-40s. Clive Caldwell was the biggest Australian ace of the Second World War. He was credited with 28.5 victories, of which 22 were on the P-40, making him also the biggest ace using the American warplane. He flew the P-40 on the North African campaign and later the Spitfire on the Pacific front. He would receive the nickname of Killer, something he disliked. Reportedly, this nickname came from the practice of shooting at German airmen that bailed out and were descending on parachutes. This started after seeing his good friend, pilot Donald Munro, killed in such a tragic way. He would deny any bloodlust and stated that it was just a matter of not wanting them back to have another go at us. I never shot any who landed where they could be taken prisoner. His career would end on a negative note after resigning in protest at the misuse of Australian fighter unions. He was also court-martialed for trading liquor. It would be easy to describe the P-40 for what it wasn't. It wasn't the best American fighter of World War II. It didn't reach the heights that the P-47 Thunderbolt or the P-51 Mustang did. Still, the P-40 had some virtues, and recent historical revision has shed a brighter light on the Warhawk. It played a very important role on some battlefronts, especially on the North African and Pacific. It also played an important role in the Eastern Front, where a considerable amount of P-40s were used by the Soviet Union. The P-40 was loved by many of its pilots, who mostly complimented its resilience, its ability to dive and to maneuver at high speed. It had a very big longevity, being produced almost through the entire Second World War, and that in itself proves its usefulness. On a negative note, the biggest German ace in North Africa, Hans-Joachim Marseille, is reported to have shot down as many as 101 P-40 during his career. The P-40 was used successfully by pilots from the United States, Britain, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Netherlands, France, Soviet Union, China, Egypt and Turkey, fighting in almost every single front line of the Second World War, and this is the true legacy of the P-40 Warhawk. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing and pressing the notification button. It would help me a lot. Feel free to tell me what can be done better in the comments below. There will be plenty more videos to come.